Welcome to the City Current Show, powered by Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services.
This show focuses on sharing good news and powering the good in our community. Now here's your host, City Current CEO, Jeremy Park.
Welcome back to the City Current Show, powered by Higginbotham. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good. And in this case, we're talking about video games, the law, and video games that power the good. And that's why we're honored to have with us Matthew Hooper, managing partner with IME Law, a division of Immix Law Group. How are you doing?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Excited to have a chance to talk with you.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have a lot of fun conversations because this world is extremely fascinating. So let's start out with, how did you get into this world of law and video games?
Yeah, sure. So I started out by doing mostly, film kind of legal work and television legal work. Did a lot of financings for several films that a lot of people probably are familiar with. Black Mass with Johnny Depp, and Everest with Jake Gyllenhaal, and a whole bunch of Lone Survivor with Mark Wahlberg, which is I think a great film. I'm glad we helped with the financing, but I don't think I can watch it too many times because it's a pretty compelling story. And did that for a very long time. But as the film world started to change and streaming started to rise up and become kind of the preeminent form of consumption of film and television, the world of independent film changed dramatically. And around that time, we were getting more and more involved, my firm, in video games, and I was kind of leading the way in that space. And then had a couple of different matters with a couple of kind of the bigger names in the game space, the individuals who helped create some of the bigger games, where we needed the help with some litigation, some courtroom stuff, and then also some transactions. So started to do that and build upon that experience and that background in film and entertainment to get into the game industry.
And when you think about it, video games now are like movies. I mean, they're basically mini movies. They're inspired by movies. They're inspiring movies. And so definitely a lot of overlap between the movie industry and video games. Go ahead and switch over and talk about IME Law and Immix Law Group. Give us some background on the company.
Yeah, sure. So Immix Law Group is a full service law firm. We do everything from M&A, mergers and acquisitions, to startup companies, to film and television deals, to video games. The IME division is really that section that's focused on the film, television, games, virtual reality, all that fun stuff. And so it's kind of like, if you have to be a lawyer, I think this is the place to be a lawyer, because it's always interesting. And on the video game space, we're lead counsel on the largest. So in the world of film, you have producers that produce films, and then you have distributors that distribute films. So like Universal or Warner Brothers or Disney would be deemed distributors of film, as examples. There's studios as well, but that's what they do. Whereas in the world of video games, to parallel that, you have developers which develop games, and then you have publishers which publish games, kind of like in books. You have authors that write books, and you have publishers that publish books, right? So we do a lot of deals between developers on behalf of developers, kind of the little guy, so to speak, although some of them can be quite large, and those publishing entities that you've heard of, like EA or Take-Two or Activision, Microsoft, Sony, those kind of groups. And so we kind of pride ourselves on trying to be the best in class at those deals. For example, in 2021 and 2022, we did the largest deals in the world on behalf of developers, opposite publishers, in so much as the gross amount of payment for development services and also royalties. When you look at the Forbes list of the top 20 highest grossing games of the last decade, we represent the lead writer, lead developer, and lead producer of the 3 highest grossing games of the last decade. So we try to, do that work that's kind of the cutting edge, biggest games in the world kind of work. But we also do smaller indie games as well, where we have budgets of 5 to 10 million. So there's a range there. But it is a really enjoyable place to be. I think with film and television, there's a tendency, how to describe it? It's a little bit different. I like working with video games because I get to work with software developers and artists, right? It's a different personality. They're not really always seeking the limelight, seeking the spotlight, right? They're more behind the scenes. They want to create cool stuff that's fun. And I just think that's a really great type of person to work with.
I'm fascinated just by this personally. And so I'm curious, do the developers come with the game already done and then present it for the deal? So in other words, like an author, do they write the book and then present it to the publisher, or do they go and present the idea and then come back and develop the game?
It's a great question. Yeah. So there's a couple different ways it can happen. One is developer has an idea. They go out and they raise some seed capital, or more than seed capital, to build a game based on that idea. And then at some point in time along the lines, they approach a publisher and they say, "Hey, publisher, we want you to publish the game." And that can, we'll talk about the stages where that can happen. But there's also the side where they just come in with an idea to a publisher and say, "Hey, publisher, we as a development studio want to make this game. Will you fund it?" There's a number of differences in those deals, though. So if you go out and raise capital and develop the game yourself and then go to a publisher, more likely than not, you're going to own the intellectual property rights in that game, right? So you'll own the copyright, you'll own the characters, you'll own spin-off rights and sequel rights and all that stuff. Whereas if you go to a publisher too early and they fund most of the development of the game, the publisher is going to take all those rights. You might get some sort of what we call a passive royalty, so some very small percentage of what they make in the future, or some right of first negotiation to develop the next one, but not always. So what we like to see is we prefer, in most cases, for developers to at least raise enough money themselves through venture capital or angel investors to be able to at least develop a prototype. Sometimes even get into what we call vertical slice, which is like a playable slice of the game that's kind of like in final form. And that way, when you go to a publisher, you have a lot more leverage to be able to hold on to the IP.
You mentioned earlier VR, virtual reality. And so what are some of the major trends that you see taking place right now in the video game industry?
Well, artificial intelligence is a huge part now of video games. And I think in 5 to 10 years, the way games are developed is going to be completely different, including this concept of user-generated content. So maybe we start there and then we talk about where things are going. So we represent the largest UGC creative studio on the planet, GameFam. They have several of the top games on Roblox and on Fortnite. And what's really neat is now users, just anyone like you and me, can go into these places like a Fortnite or a Roblox, or there's a new platform called Everywhere that's coming out soon, and you can build your own video games and then let other people come in and play, and you can charge them to play your game and get a piece of it. That's a big change. And if you look back 10 years, the only people that could create video games were people in the major development studios. Some indie games were emerging, but major dev studios. You could do like a small PC game yourself, or you could do and release it on Steam, or you could do a smaller kind of game with exceptions. There's some standouts where very small teams created very big games. But now for one person to be able to not know how to code, or have very limited coding experience, and to be able to go into these different platforms and start to be able to create video games, I think that's where things are heading. Then you layer in artificial intelligence, where you're going to say, build me a platform that shifts back and forth, or create a background that looks like a futuristic, lab where robots are being built. And the AI just generates that for you, right? Suddenly you're going to see the world of AAA game development changing massively. And in large part because UGC, I think, is going to drive that. Which means user-generated content, in case I didn't explain that. The other kind of, you said the future, I think virtual reality will probably always be a bit of a struggle until we are developing headsets that allow people not to lose the sense that is most important to them, which is the sense of sight. I think whenever you put a headset on someone and you take away that sense, it's going to be a bit challenging for the broader consumer marketplace. I do think, though, as hybrid goggles continue to be developed, like those that Apple is working on and others, where you can have that ability to have augmented reality, which is where you can see through it, but there's holograms in your line of vision, and be able to switch into virtual reality when you're in a safe, secure environment. I think that's probably going to become a growing sector of entertainment. But I think that's something that's still being worked on.
I grew up playing video games. Our kids play video games. And when I was growing up, there was one cost on the front end to buy the video game and you played your way through it. Now it seems like you get the video game almost for free or low cost, but to be able to succeed, to get the cool new skins and all the equipment, there's a cost. And so now there's all these costs that continue to build to be able to play your way through the game with success. And so the business model of video games has massively evolved and changed. And then you take in movie deals and merch and all of this, the business of video games is huge. And so talk about where you see this business model of video games going.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. The video game industry is growing year over year, we're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars. The mobile game sector is an interesting one because it's just so readily available to everybody. And I think as mobile phones continue to develop, you're going to see a lot of growth in that area. To your point, I think really free to play for most consumers, people became familiar with it via mobile, where you get Angry Birds, or you get I play this game called Fishdom, where you get it's match 3 essentially, but they make it just hard enough where you're going to have to buy some ability to get it done, right? So I think it's a really smart way of monetizing things. It oftentimes winds up being more profitable than a premium model. And that's why you see certain companies moving into these live service games that have incredible tail periods. You sell, $50 million or $100 million worth of premium sales, but then your online tail is multiples of that every single year for multiple years. So to your point, yeah, that is certainly, I think, going to be the future and the continued trend for games moving forward.
Well, I mentioned it in the intro, but video games are also helping to power the good. And so talk about what you're seeing on that side with improved learning outcomes, gamifying to solve challenges, to transform lives. So talk about how video games are helping to power the good.
Well, it's interesting because I've been a big proponent of games for good since for well over a decade. And the ability for games to impact human beings' lives is just incredible. You have the opportunity to teach through games in a way that a lot of kids don't or can't learn. I always say, there are a lot of kids who don't learn well by just seeing something on a board or by just hearing it, right? But when they interact with it, they do learn, especially if it helps them to achieve a goal. So you see different video games that are as basic as making good nutritional choices, where kids have to, at a young age, have to pick the right thing that allows them to their character to grow, to a game I used to like to speak about a lot called Dragon Box, where basically you start off with a screen where there's an equal sign in the middle, and you have a cherry and an orange on one side and a cherry on the other side, and you have to make them equal. So the kids get the idea of making the equations equal. And then over time, those different avatars are replaced with numbers or letters. And these kids who are 4, 5, 6 years old are learning linear algebra. They just don't know it. And every time they pass a level, they get this little baby dragon, and it grows and it grows and it grows. And these kids are just learning advanced mathematics. And the same thing goes for spelling, social sciences. And then there's some real outliers that are just incredible. There is a game called Fold It that came out of the University of Washington, where people could learn to fold proteins in the game community, but it was a multiplayer environment. So something people don't understand about viruses is that viruses, for the most part, are comprised of proteins. And so if you can figure out how those proteins exist within that virus, how they fold, because they'll always fold into the most energy efficient form possible and the most consolidated form possible. And unfortunately, scientists can't really see how they fold under these large microscopes. And so but there are certain predictable factors based on a number of different indicators that allow you to know essentially what would and wouldn't fold. And so they dropped these proteins into this video game and opened it up to the world. And all these different players came in, and they were finding ways to take these protein strings and fold them into their kind of most efficient way possible. And the reason that matters is because if you can figure that out, you can figure out how to put protein blockers in that block them from being able to replicate. And if you can do that, you can actually stop viruses in their tracks. And so the game was called Folded. It was pretty spectacular. And then the other one that I found fascinating was a CBS report from a few years ago with virtual reality, where they had certain patients who had very serious spinal cord injuries, where they were paralyzed for some period of time. And utilizing virtual reality and motion sensors in the bikes, in bikes they put people's legs in, they were able to actually cause the brain to start to build new nerve networks through the body to the legs. I'll send you a link to that one. That was, to me, the most amazing thing. Like the fact that immersive reality could cause the body to react physiologically and perhaps heal. So I think the future for games for good is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about to me is wildly exciting, because when you think about technology, innovation, augmented reality, VR to transform lives, how we can gamify to solve some of our greatest challenges, I just think it's inspiring to see how video games and technology can help power the good. So this is one of those conversations that could go on forever, but since we're out of time, let's go ahead and wrap up. We'll have you come back on and we'll dive in deeper later, but where can we go to follow your efforts to carry these conversations forward? So where do we go to get involved and learn more about IME Law and Immix Law Group?
Yeah, sure. So on Twitter, it's really simple. It's just mhoop law. It's MHOOPLAW. You can always check out our website at immixlaw.com. It's IMMIXLAW.com. And you can catch me on LinkedIn as well. But always happy to talk to anyone that wants to talk about games.
Yeah, so very cool. So Matthew Hooper, managing partner, IME Law, a division of Immix Law Group. Thank you for all you and your amazing team do to power the good. Thank you for being City Current partners as well. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. This was great. I really appreciate you. Thanks for having us.
Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services is proud to power the City Current Show. We're a people-first company that protects what matters most, the families, businesses, and trailblazers that keep our community going. As one of the nation's top independent insurance firms, Higginbotham is a single-source solution for business insurance, employee benefits, HR services, and personal insurance that's customized for you. We're here to serve you, the people you care about, and your community. Call 866-377-1959 or visit higginbotham.com.